All right, so I thought it'd be good to continue to talk about Phillips 66 acquisition of the two 50% interests that they didn't own in Wood River and Borger refineries. A couple weeks ago, we did do a quick video on the two pipelines that connect into Borger Refinery and really are the main supply to that refinery. We'll review those very quickly at the beginning of this video, and then we'll dive into the four pipelines that feed Wood River in Illinois. Before we get started, we are kicking off or have kicked off. We've done a couple weeks of newsletters called our Crude Conduit newsletter. The purpose of that is really to review newsworthy items from the week and also add some data in small informational stories about stuff that we found interesting that we came across during the week with some of our data updates that may not be enough to do a full video on, but certainly interesting enough to talk about in a little snippet. And we'll have a few of those stories every week for you all. Please read it. It should be a short read. We'll also provide links to interesting stories that we found interesting during the week. We won't have commentary on those, but interesting stories that we found interesting. And also, we will provide a table with new pipelines that we've added to the platform and also which pipelines had data updated on our platform. So, as always, we're getting new data basically every week, sometimes every day, and we're updating those as fast as possible. So, usually same day, certainly same week, we're updating those in our platform. So, let's get started. As I said, the last time we talked about the Borger refinery, so Phillips 66 purchased Cenovus's interest, 50% interest in this refinery, which now Phillips 66 owns 100% of both Wood River over here and Borger here. The last time we talked about how there's really two main pipelines feeding this refinery. So the refinery's here, this Permian system is feeding it. This is an idle line, so this pipeline is no longer in use. It's a Phillips 66 line that came over from Cushing. They did idle that a few years ago, and now they get their Cushing oil from a third-party pipeline called Canyon Crossing. So that comes across there. So if you're interested in more in-depth on that, my prior video went over that. So let's talk about Wood River here. It's a bigger refinery than Borger. So Borger is about 150,000 barrels a day of capacity. Wood River's a little over 350,000 barrels a day of capacity, so a pretty good sized refinery here in the Midwest. And probably there's a little bit of mystery. We don't have the best data on actual inlets to the refinery, but we can piece some things together. So we'll talk about what I think is the biggest contributor of crude to that refinery, and that's Keystone Pipeline. So I think most everyone's familiar with Keystone Pipeline. This is base Keystone Pipeline. Keystone XL was never built. And this is carrying about 600,000 barrels a day down from Canada. This is primarily heavy crude. So we can click on the flows and see that. Dark blue is heavy. The orange is light. So as you can see, mostly heavy crude, right around 600,000 barrels a day coming down. Now, what's interesting about this pipeline, and I've talked about it in prior videos, is this is a 30-inch line. Excuse my poor penmanship there. But it's a 30-inch line all the way down to Steel City, Nebraska here. Once it gets here, there's a leg that comes across to Wood River and Patoka. It goes all the way to Patoka. That's also a 30-inch line. And then you have the Cushing extension here, and then the Market Link piece here. So it's a 36-inch line. So the whole point, and I've said this in another video of Keystone XL, was you're bringing a 30-inch pipeline and then splitting it off into a 36 and a 30-inch pipeline. That means you have a lot of excess capacity on these pipes that's unused. So you have a lot of capacity that you can fill. So the point of XL was to, hey, let's build a new pipeline and put it into Steel City. From there, we already have existing steel in the ground that we can move those barrels either south to the Gulf Coast and Cushing or more barrels across to Patoka and St. Louis. Obviously, that never happened, so that just never came about. But that was the goal of kind of this system. So I showed you the 600,000 barrels a day coming down here. Once it hits Steel City, and maybe somebody smarter than me has figured this out, I don't think that there's a way to calculate what's being split off here, either through company disclosures, certainly not from the federal or state disclosures that I've looked at. I can't tell you what's actually coming toward the Wood River Patoka area versus what's going down to Cushing. Once the line hits Texas, we certainly know what's moving down this way from state disclosures, but the split here I can't see for sure, so it's kind of a guessing game. I will tell you that Conoco was the anchor shipper on this pipeline, and they originally committed 300,000 barrels a day of capacity. Now that was probably a mix of capacity that was supply push here and demand pull. This was when Conoco, around 2005, owned this refinery all full out. So I do think that there's committed capacity, a fair amount of committed capacity down to the Wood River area, previously held by Conoco. Probably some of that still lives with Phillips 66 through the spinoffs, but I can't say that for sure of what the number is, if it's 300,000 barrels a day or if it's less. But there's very likely a pretty large commitment coming this way. We also know Husky held a commitment or holds a commitment for a decent chunk of capacity. I think it's around 75,000 barrels a day that's coming this way, and it appears to get to Patoka where they can feed their Lima refinery, owned by Cenovus now. Cenovus now acquired Husky. So that's another contract that has been disclosed, has been on this piece. If I had to guess, I would probably say there's probably 200 to 300,000 barrels a day that comes down this leg. So that leaves 300 to 400,000 barrels a day going down the Cushing leg. So again, these single chevrons, I don't think I've said this before, but if you see a triple chevron on our platform, that means there's a flow point and you can see the flows. If you see a single chevron, no flow point, you just get maybe a capacity there. So we can't see the flows there, unfortunately. If I had to guess, I would guess that there's probably 150,000 barrels a day coming in on Keystone that feeds Wood River Refinery. Again, I can't see it for sure, but that would be my guess based on some of the prior disclosures of committed capacity of Conoco. Could it be more than that? Yeah, it could be, but they can't take all heavy crude at this refinery. So 150, maybe up to 200,000 barrels a day would be my guess of what's coming into Wood River Refinery off Keystone. So that's a good chunk. It's probably maybe half of, right around half of the capacity of the refinery gets its oil from Keystone. So I think that's a good overview for Keystone. Next one we'll talk about Capwood. So this is a Plains pipeline that's moving barrels from Patoka over to Wood River. I think these flows are pretty good. I will caution on these flows that there could be some short haul barrels that are maybe being pumped over, like just really short haul from Patoka terminal to a different Patoka terminal, that are causing these spikes here. But I think this is probably pretty good flow. Idea on flows, probably around 85 to 90,000 barrels a day flowing from Patoka, coming across and feeding Wood River. So these are barrels we talked about with Keystone. Keystone's going to be Canadian heavy barrels coming down and feeding that. These are going to be a mix of barrels. These could potentially be heavy barrels. I kind of doubt they're taking heavy barrels across there. But it could be Bakken barrels, light barrels that are coming down from the Bakken. So barrels that are coming down this way on DAPL. DAPL comes into Patoka and then comes across here. That's certainly possible. Okay, moving on to the next one. Let's talk about Ozark. So Ozark's a line owned by MPLX. That's moving barrels from Cushing up into the Wood River area. MPLX has a couple lines here that take barrels over to Patoka, which can then be spread to kind of all the Marathon and Mid-Continent refineries in this area. So if we just look at flows, this pipeline was expanded back in 2017 and into 2018, and they have stays pretty full, at least recently. So a lot of barrels down this line here. You obviously have a pretty big mix of where you're getting barrels from with this one. Being at Cushing, this could be Permian barrels coming up, although there's less of that today. So it could be Permian barrels coming up on Basin. Centurion could be bringing those barrels. You have obviously a lot of DJ barrels coming in here. You have barrels coming down from the Bakken, feeding into this area, feeding into the Guernsey area and coming across. So yeah, this is being able to pull from Cushing and not having it be that big of a distance. They're not paying a huge toll on this pipeline, although they do have market-based rates on this pipe, so they can kind of charge whatever they want, is pretty beneficial. So a nice link to Cushing there for that piece. And then for the last one, let's clear this out. Let's look at Platte pipeline. So we've talked about Platte pipeline on several other videos, but this is a pipeline that's bringing barrels from a variety of places. So it can source barrels at Casper here, and those barrels are largely going to be coming from its sister pipeline, the Express pipeline coming down from Canada, feeding it here. But they can certainly also source some barrels at Guernsey here. So those are going to be barrels that could be Powder River barrels. This would be Bakken barrels. They could be Powder River barrels here. So a nice source of a different variety of crudes that could come across and go into Wood River there. It's worth noting, clear this up, I didn't mention it with Ozark, but I'll bring Ozark back up quick. Let's look at the flows really quick on this, just so you can get an idea. Say tailed off certainly recently, a little bit under 100,000 barrels a day coming across. Picked up a little bit in Q2 to over 110,000 barrels a day. Both Ozark and Platte, through disclosures a few years ago in Ozark's market-based rate filing and testimony, it was noted that both of these do deliver into Wood River, but most of their barrels for both of these pipelines end up going over to Patoka. So I kind of talked about what we thought the barrel mix would be, and let's just bring all the pipes back on here. So, I mean, if we say, let's say 175,000 barrels a day coming across on Keystone, so Keystone here to Steel City and then across, let's say 75,000 barrels a day coming across on Capwood, that gets you to 250, and then you have 100,000 left between Ozark, let's say 50 to 75 on Ozark and 25 to 50 on Platte. That's what's feeding this. So it's really well positioned from their ability to pull from a lot of different slates of crude. So certainly they have pretty direct access via Keystone to the Canadian crude coming down here and coming across. They have access to Powder River through Platte, Bakken through Platte, some Canadian crude through Platte via Express coming down. They have access to Patoka, which is going to have Bakken barrels in it. And then they have access to Cushing, which could be Permian barrels, Mid-Continent barrels. So really a well-positioned system from a crude diversity standpoint of what they can pull. So it's interesting. Yeah, I thought it would be useful to talk about this one. It's a nice. It appears from at least their ability to pull from different types of crude and access to different crudes to be a nice setup and a nice system. So yeah, check out Crude Conduit this weekend. I'll try to get that out a little bit earlier on Sunday so it's not so late. But I hope everybody has a great Friday tomorrow. And please reach out. I'll put my email address in the body of the summary of the story. Reach out if you have any questions or if you want to test drive the platform. Always happy to have more people test drive for us. Have a great day.